I'm Sonia Forensic, and I work at the Ohio Domestic Violence Network in the role of youth advocate and trauma informed services coordinator. ODVN is a domestic violence state coalition. We mobilize the voice of domestic violence with the 88 counties in Ohio and the domestic violence programs within those counties. We're their resource, support. We offer training. We also do policy work in the state house and even at the federal level to bring better services and more funding to the programs in Ohio. We have prevention, legal assistance program, hotel assistance for survivors and their children who are also surviving, who may not be able to stay in a shelter. We have training. We share best practices with programs and allied professionals on how to support survivors who experience domestic violence. There is a lot more at ODVN, but that's some of the highlights. Common misconceptions of domestic violence are really that people think it's only physical harm. A lot of times when I'm out talking with people and I'll say, what do you think domestic violence is? That's the first go-to, is somebody being hurt. And that's very true, and it's very dangerous for many victims of domestic violence. The thing that's behind the scenes that's driving all of the hurt and the harm and the cruelty is emotional abuse and psychological abuse. It involves using money, so financial abuse, in ways that isolate the survivor in the intimate relationship. The child survivors in the relationship might not be able to have everything they need because money is being controlled by the abusive partner. Other tactics include, many people hear of gaslighting, where you're really setting the abusive partner is setting the stage to create like this unevenness in a psychological way, where they're making the survivor who's being victimized second guessing like every things that happen, or they're being blamed for things. And if you live in that environment, in that intensity, it chips away oftentimes. To summarize, the physical abuse becomes part of the experience that is traumatizing, so that it can keep the survivor from trying other ways to stop or mitigate the violence. Because when you get hurt by somebody that you love, that's twisting of love and abuse. So I think the other misconception, there are many, but one of the other misconceptions includes people think it's easy to leave an abusive partner, and it is not. It's not because of the menacing and the stalking and the barriers to leaving. That includes systems. It's about protection. And statistics prove out, even though this is there's a human element to all this, that when people try to leave the abusive relationship, the abuser loses more control and then can escalate their behavior. So many women that I worked with left when it was quieter in the relationship because it was a little safer to leave. Some left when someone arrived and helped them, at the scene of what was going on. but the abusive partner is going to manipulate other people's perception to make it look like it's the victim who's unhinged or you know, not a good parent or causing all the trouble. So that's really complex and can take a, you know, can take a lot for family and friends to understand or even see sometimes. My first work was in shelter in Northeast Ohio, and I worked there for over 25, between 25 and 30 years. I just did some other things while working in shelter, but yeah, so really lived it, it's amazing. It's amazing work because you get to meet families and people who are single that are, really, they're empowered to change something, even though so much is in front of them and has happened to them. It's been really meaningful. It's not easy, but it's really meaningful. I've met a lot of really amazing women and children and teenagers. I've worked with lots of young guys, like boys who have lived with domestic violence, and also girls. And they have to, oftentimes when they have to go to visitation, so working with kids through those experiences of visitation, staying with a parent that was abusive, really taught me a lot about what kids go through. Because when a survivor is able to leave that risky and dangerous relationship, if there's children involved, they're oftentimes mandated to share parenting and visit. And so domestic violence can continue in that realm through all those visits and pickups and stops. And so that's why you'll see visitation centers with drop-off and pickups with people who are living with domestic violence or left a partner who was violent. Some of the biggest challenges for families include having safety. I think that's the biggest challenge, is having physical and emotional safety. They are trying to navigate, live, go to school, be in their family and community, all the while knowing that it's not safe for them. So, as I talked about earlier, isolation drives a lot of the tactics of what the batterer creates in their family. And obstacles can include if money and healthcare are a part of this family unit, leaving can create, not having that. So there's life-generated risks to leaving, and abuser-generated risks. That's the work of Jill Davies. She really took the experiences of people who were living with an abusive partner in this relationship and looked at how, like, life-generated risks include systemic racism, poverty, being born or identifying female, and the less wages that you might make in your job. The opportunities can be life-generated risks. People who have immigrated to our country or are undocumented, batterers use that information to further isolate the victim. So getting referred to the right resources, like in our 88 counties, our agencies and resources can be a barrier. If somebody doesn't know that you can call a helpline or text a chat line. So life-generated risk can include also being deaf, being hard of hearing, blind, having injuries that you can't go get help for because you're isolated, either by where you live in the state. You might not be close to a hospital, but you can't always tell the person when you arrive at the hospital what's happening to you, because the abusive partner might have taken you and is standing right there. So there's really savvy, ways to, there's nurses that are trained in this, and they'll ask them to step into a different room. But those are barriers to being able to tell someone what might be happening. The tactics of physical abuse, the tactics of money, the ways that they threaten friends and family, sabotage jobs. So there's a lot of different ways a lot of different barriers: money, transportation, being able to get places. If you live where I grew up, it would take a half an hour to get to the courthouse. And if you don't have transportation, you got to rely on somebody to help you, because there's no public transportation. So even looking at, like, geographically, when we're serving families, what are some of those barriers and challenges? The resiliency of people experiencing domestic violence it's palpable, because you can see all that they've lived through and survived, and the ways that they've protected their children in the midst of somebody being harmful to all of them. There's a lot of, I used to say to some women that I would talk to, you've been really brave and made a really, important decision and journey to get here. And many would say it's not. They would stop me at the word bravery and go, I feel like I got that look from them, and I knew that if I didn't get out, I wasn't going to be alive. The seriousness of domestic violence is really real. And so that can be a barrier in and of itself if you're fearing for your life. It can be very complex for people to understand looking from the outside, but staying in an abusive relationship is actually an option of trying to survive it, because to leave it is more dangerous, and then it puts my kids in all of the things we talked about. My life has been impacted by working with children and women and other advocates in this work of serving survivors in really powerful ways. I'm probably going to get emotional. It's taught me to really look at people and to pay attention to them, whether I'm at work or in our community, like really seeing everyone, because and acknowledging them and saying hello or how are you today, which can sound really simple, but that's how this work's impacted me, because it's people that are feeling alone and isolated. There's the invisible acts of power that we can have to validate another person's life and that they're there in that present moment. So I know that might sound like, oh, but it's very, because the one thing that we can do is be present with another human being. There's healing in that. It may not solve, it might not get the protection order, it might not get the person to the next place, but in the moments or the hours or the days or the months and sometimes years that I've worked with children and women in shelter, and now advocates in our state, um, validating who they are, what they want in their life is really meaningful. One thing that's really real for experience for the work, that I've done in my life and for other advocates is vicarious trauma. So what that means is the secondary exposure of listening when we're on hotline calls, working safety planning with someone that's in the midst of their life being threatened, sitting with children and listening and validating them, describing maybe what they've seen while they're playing with me. We might be playing with Play-Doh, and they'll share things. All of that's taken in by those of us that do this work. And so I didn't always know how to take care of myself. So that's one of the things in the last 10 years that I've really learned to do, calming activities and noticing beauty outside, and the animals that we have in our life, and just seeing having relationships in my community. Because one of the things you can do is pull away from people, because you learn to sort of go, oh, maybe there's something there, so that trust can be lost. So I've worked to bring that back. But more than anything, this work's just really been meaningful because I have the honor of seeing and listening and being with families in the midst of their journey. And that is priceless. That's something that I can see that as I'm talking about, I can see the faces of kids that I've worked with over the years. I can hear the voices of their moms. And that stays with you,